वीडियो क्रॉप करके डालनी पड़ेगी जितना क्या यार कल बाद में मैं भूल जाऊंगी मुझे अपना पता है हम्म फाइट फाइट मैं तुम्हें होस्ट परमिशंस दे सकती हूँ वहां जाके तुम लोगों को ऐड करो मैं जाकर ऐड करती हूँ नहीं हाँ, नहीं कॉलिंग ही नहीं आएगा उनको रानी वो मैं यहाँ वो भी खोलूंगी सेटिंग्स select modification पता नहीं मैं तुम्हें नहीं दे सकती चार्ट नहीं काम कर रहा तो आई थिंक 8 बज गए हैं यार ज्यादा लाइट है मैं माइक बंद कर देती हूँ फर्स्ट hello everyone thank you so much for being here we're gonna get started at exactly 8:05 for me so we'll just wait 5 more minutes for more people to join and then we can get started now that you guys are here I just want to give you guys a reminder of your quests to submit them on time and if you have any questions do not hesitate to ask me Hello, guys. Thank you so much for being here. It's 8:05 for me. That means we can get started. I am super excited for this session. As you guys can tell, it is my session. And I will be talking about women's data in healthcare and the underrepresentation that has followed for years in medical research when it comes to women. It's called She's Missing from the Lab, and you're gonna understand why I titled it that as we go through the presentation. If you see me, sorry, if you see me looking down, I am probably just referring to my notes. I'm gonna be giving you guys all the references for anything and everything I quote today. And without further ado, let's get started. So a little bit more about me. I know we covered this section when it was the introductory session. I don't know how many of you guys attended that. So you guys may know me as the moderator for STEMQuest 2.0. A little about me is that I am originally Pakistani Kashmiri. I was born and raised in the UAE. I am currently a sophomore at AURAC, which is a university in the UAE in Ras Al Khaimah specifically. I'm a biotech student. That's a picture of me from working in one of our labs, our really long and tiring lab sessions. Something I'm passionate about, and I think this is something I wanted to talk about more today, because I remember the first time I introduced myself, it was just in like 7 bullet points. So if I could kind of summarize what I'm passionate about, we are going to start off with healthcare equity for women. Being a South Asian woman, something that I think really needs working on in developing countries is equity within healthcare and women's right to get equal healthcare access to men in developing countries. The second thing is resolving the gender data gap, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The third thing would be making STEM more accessible for students. I think proof of that is me and the team coming up with STEMQuest 2.0 for you guys. Recently, I've been getting into biotech startups. That's something I really want to increase my knowledge on. So in terms of what I'm working on this summer, I really, really have been intrigued by the field of bioinformatics. I think I mentioned this before too. I want to learn how to code with R and Python, and then eventually understand how AI can be integrated into healthcare and the research and development sector in science. So that's a little bit more about me. And without further ado, let's get started with the topic at hand we have today. And before we do that, I kind of want to know what you guys know about the gender data gap. So if you guys can very quickly in the chat box write down, what have you heard about the gender data gap? Is it something you've heard? If not, I would love for you guys to write that down too. If you've not heard about the gender data gap, I know there's things like the gender pay gap that we talk about a lot. There's things like gender-based violence we talk about a lot. What have you guys heard about the gender data gap? And I'm going to give you guys like a minute or two to type in the chat box, and I'll read out your answers. Okay, so we have 2 answers. Let me read out Ramin's answer first. I've heard about it. It's the lack of data on women leading to unfair outcomes in health, safety, and daily life, since most systems are designed around men. Lily talks about how we could look at employees. There's a gender that has a bigger percentage. Okay, so that's really interesting. Yes, we do have more. We have fields in which where perhaps the dominance of certain aspect of life, healthcare, and technology. Okay, so we have some answers pretty close to the gender data gap. So it's one race. Okay, so you guys are pretty on point. Have you guys heard the term gender data gap in itself before, or is it something that's kind of unheard for you guys? Perhaps the dominance of that you've heard of it. Okay, perfect. So a lot of you guys are on point. The definition, now I'm going to read out the definition to you guys, and then I'll kind of summarize it for you. The gender data gap refers to the disparity in the collection, representation, and analysis of data concerning men and women. It highlights the tendency for certain data sets to be skewed or incomplete, leading to a lack of accurate information about women's experiences and needs compared to men. So basically, what happens in a nutshell is when we take women are in general health test. Okay. So what basically happens is when we are working in a lab, or let's say we are working, and this is throughout various fields. It is not something that's just applicable to science. When we look at the data that is used, a lot of it is male centric. So what that does is we take male centric data, we come up with a conclusion, and then we use that conclusion to apply it to both men and women. But let's not forget the data that we used was male data. So that affects the outcome for women. And I'm going to give you guys examples. It's going to make a bit more sense as we talk about it. And as we move on, I do want to give you guys a disclaimer. Before we get into the why the gender data gap exists, know that this is not a blame game. We are not here to point fingers and say men are to blame for this or scientists are to blame for this. There is no pointing fingers and saying it was intentional. The following is just a result of a lack of thinking, and the why discussed will just be a couple of factors that has contributed to it. So remember, we are not blaming anyone. We are simply pointing out something that is a very real issue and has very real life consequences that exist, and how we can work towards closing this gap. So as I talk about the why, know that this is not something that is malicious. It is something that simply exists and we need to work on. So let's talk about why. So I kind of boiled it down to 4 reasons. Obviously, there's many other factors that contribute to it. I started off with the one-size-fits-all narrative. Objective data that we have is actually male biased. So data that is generally described to us as gender neutral is not in fact gender neutral. It is based on men. Number 2, we do know that there has been an historical exclusion of women. Women have for centuries been an afterthought, not just in all areas of life, but especially in the research and development area of life. Number 3, which goes without saying, there's cultural and societal biases. Tradition or culture has held back women from being at the forefront of research. Last but not least, we have a lack of disaggregated data. Disaggregated data refers to the separation of data by sex. So data collected is not separated by gender to account for women separately. And as we go through this presentation, you guys are going to learn why that's very important, why we need to separate the data between men and women. And so for the next slide, I'm going to kind of go off topic because I just find this really intriguing and really interesting, because in a world where we discuss male role models a lot, especially historically, I think it's only fair we take a look at something that I call history's gender edit. And it talks up, and these are just 4 women out of many. When I say many, I mean many, who were written out of their own discoveries. And we're going to go through them one by one, and I'm going to kind of briefly explain how that came to be. So number 1, we have Jocelyn Bell Burnell. Jocelyn was a physicist who first discovered the first radio pulsars in 1967. Did she receive a Nobel Prize for it? No. In 1974, the Nobel Prize was given to her male supervisor, Anthony Hewish, and another male colleague, even though she was the one who did the primary observational work. Now, Jocelyn, she was a PhD student at the time. She was a graduate. A lot of people say that, oh, she wasn't given the Nobel Prize because she was a graduate. But the truth is, and what most people believe, is because she was a woman, she did not receive a Nobel Prize. Because let's not forget, this has happened throughout history. So it's only fair for us to assume that. Number 2 is a very famous example, and something that I've noticed was when I was in 10th grade biology, I learned that Watson and Crick were the 2 men who came up with the double helix structure, or kind of figured out the double helix structure of the DNA. When I came to university and I took my first ever Uni Bio 1 course, our professor said, no, it's actually Rosalind Franklin. And Watson and Crick, basically, so how that came to be is Rosalind Franklin, she used a technique called X-ray crystallography. And Watson and Crick, using her data without her permission, they used it to come up with the structure. And they didn't acknowledge her. She was not even acknowledged for the Nobel Prize that was given in 1962. And I'm pretty sure you guys have heard the names Watson and Crick, but it was actually not their work entirely. And Rosalind Franklin was years later credit for it. Next up, I included a non-science example, which is Margaret Keane. Margaret was a painter. Her second husband, Walter Keane, took credit for her phenomenally popular paintings. I think her paintings were known for big eyes. I think that's something that was very liked at the time. So it's really, truly. Okay, so I'm going to pause. We're going to read through Whitney's comment. My sister's in the field of astrophysics. She's met Professor Jocelyn Bell. And even in her industry, the gender gap is so wide and evident since most people are going to mention exactly. So we do notice this around us. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Okay, lastly, we have Nettie Stevens. She was actually the first to discover that an organism's sex is determined by its chromosomes. And I believe she did this experiment on worms. I'm not entirely sure, but widely credited for it is Mr. Thomas Hunt Morgan, who also won a Nobel Prize in 1933. And these are just a few examples, guys. There are so many other examples. In fact, I would recommend you guys read the book that I've recently been reading. It's called Invisible Women. I'm going to be very honest. I very fairly recently stumbled upon this topic of the gender data gap, and I truly think it's sickening. But as we go through it, you guys will understand why I chose to add this topic. So these are just 4 examples of women who were not properly credited for the immense amount of impact they've had within STEM and beyond. Okay, moving on. Why does it matter? And this is where things start to get real, right? According to University of Virginia in 2011, women are 47% more likely to be injured and 17% more likely to die in a car crash compared to men. Why? The problem here is that crash test dummies are based on the average male body, which is about 5'9" in height and 170 pounds. And most safety data comes from male-centric testing. Now, how many of you guys know a woman who's 170 pounds? That's about 77 kilograms for people who follow the kilogram system like me. So just simply because of the fact that we have used male dummies to test for car crashes, women are 47% more likely to be injured. In fact, I think there was actually a study that said there have been no studies done on pregnant women who drive and their car crashing. So it's crazy. Moving on, according to the British Heart Foundation in 2019, women are 50% more likely to be misdiagnosed when having a heart attack. The problem here, heart attack symptoms in women often differ. Women tend to feel nausea, fatigue, back pain instead of the normal chest pain that a man would feel. But obviously, clinical studies and training materials are based mostly on male symptoms. So women are not diagnosed properly when having a literal heart attack. Moving on, according to the US Government Accountability Office in 2001, women are twice as likely to suffer adverse drug reactions as dosage and effects differ by sex often. The problem is that many drugs are only tested on male participants in clinical trials due to concerns about hormonal variability. So they basically excluded women from clinical studies because of their hormonal variability, completely forgetting that is something that makes a woman in the first place. Lastly, for all my STEM aspirants out there, ill-fitting PPE, which is personal protective equipment when you're working in a lab, reduces protection, and female healthcare workers reported higher rates of mask failure during COVID-19. So the problem here is that PPE, including lab coats, body armor, and masks, are often designed for male body shapes. And this was a study done by the British Medical Journal in 2020, which is very recent, after female healthcare workers reported getting sick more. Why was that? The masks they wore and the equipment they wore didn't fit them well enough for them to actually prevent the disease from happening. And this is very recent. This is from COVID-19. If these examples are not enough, I want to actually talk about within science. And I want to kind of expand on it, and I gave you guys 4 examples. And these, as I talk about these examples, guys, I want you to realize these are only examples that have been studied. And these, even out of the study examples, these are just a few that I'm mentioning in my PowerPoint today. Let's start. Number 1, the male default in medical research. Until the 1990s, which is only a few decades ago, most clinical research excluded women, especially those of childbearing age, to avoid hormonal fluctuations. Now, in the category of childbearing age is any woman who has gotten her period. So they basically excluded most women from their studies. And an example of this on why this is so harmful, I actually read this the other day. There's a sleep drug that was called Ambien. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. That sleep drug metabolized differently in women. It metabolized slower in women. So when they would take this drug, they would still feel the drowsiness of it in the morning. So after it was released, the FDA took it back and said, hey, you know what? Maybe we need to reduce the dosage for women because it metabolizes differently in their bodies. Would have this been a problem if they tested it equally on male and female participants? No. Next up, we're going to talk about okay, and this is very important, guys. This is very, very important. Reproductive health in the in the year of 2025 is understudied and underfunded. Conditions like endometriosis, PCOS, fibroids, and menopause are underfunded and misdiagnosed and often dismissed. Just an example, just a cute statistic for you guys. It takes on average 7 to 10 years to diagnose endometriosis. And it is not because it's difficult to diagnose, it is simply because we do not have enough research done on endometriosis. In fact, I saw this TikTok the other day. There are more studies on male baldness than there are on endometriosis. If that doesn't shock you, I don't know what will. We know that endometriosis affects, by the way, 1 in 10 women. We know PCOS affects 6 to 13% of women, but 70% of the cases are undiagnosed. So let's say you have 100 women. Out of them, 10 have PCOS, out of which only 3 will know that they actually have PCOS. 7 out of 10 won't know they have PCOS because we have not researched enough on it for us to accurately be able to diagnose it. So, and PCOS is actually a very serious condition. I know some of my friends who've been affected by it. There's metabolic challenges, there's cardiovascular disease, there's even reproductive challenges for women who have PCOS. Next up, we're going to talk about chronic pain and gender bias. Women make up, and listen to this, women make up 70% of chronic pain patients, but the majority of the pain research is based on male subjects. This is according to, by the way, reference is according to the Institute of Medicine in 2011. So women also, by the way, are mostly women are affected by autoimmune diseases, IBS, fibromyalgia. All of these are more common in women, but we research them more in men using male participants and male subjects. And then if you guys think the gender gap is bad in humans, it also exists in animal testing when we are using mice. So even for fields in neuroscience, pharmacology, immunology, we tend to use male mice, even though some medical health conditions are more common in women. An example of this is the pain perception of women's brains are different. And even certain depression medications or treatments like SSRIs were developed and tested on male models, which completely fail to account how estrogen affects and influences serotonin uptake. And we're literally talking about antidepressants. We're talking about mental health conditions which affect women more. In pharmacology, between 1997 to 2000, 80% of the drugs that were withdrawn from the US market had more adverse effects on women, and we were completely unaware of that because, once again, we never had female subjects to test them on. So that's just four examples of the gender data gap in science. And it's honestly, it's really shocking that when we talk about giving drug dosages to men and women, we never really think of, oh, you're a girl, maybe you need a lower dosage, maybe your metabolism is not as slow. So really, we need to work towards, before we start to work towards personalized medicine, we need to talk about how we can close this gender gap. Moving on. What happens if we don't fix it? And guys, these are just three very basic ways that I have outlined what happens if we don't fix it. There are real life huge repercussions if we don't fix the gender data gap, or if at least we don't refine the data that we use to make it more gender inclusive. Number one, AI-driven medical tools can underdiagnose women. So Stanford and Google AI, they actually trained on chest x-rays, and these tools performed better on men than women. Number two, urban designing and public services continue to reflect male-centric routes. And this is something that I was not even aware of until like last week. Do you know that in general, men and women tend to take this? So I would be referring to adult men and women, not teenage men and women. They usually tend to have different routes. So men-centric routes usually consist of a man just waking up in the morning, going to his job, coming back, and then that's basically his only route. For women, these routes differ. Women are more likely to go grocery shopping, drop their kids off at school, and just follow other paths. In urban planning, a lot of governments, they tend to focus on the male-centric way of designing these transport systems. And so that's going to be a huge issue for us if we keep on continuing to if we keep on continuing to make our transport routes catering to men. Because let's not forget, women are increasingly joining the workforce as we progress. I think there's a lot of countries where it's a 50-50. So really, there's no excuse for governments to not work towards a more inclusive route. In fact, in Vienna, data from women's routes was used to change sidewalks, lighting, and even like basically just support their routes. And that increased the country's productivity. It reduced their costs. So it really is productive. If anyone tries to convince you that, and we're going to go over the counter arguments that people have for the gender data gap, but that's really fun. Number three, we have safety tech like crash prediction or wearable sensors that fail to recognize or protect women. We talked about the car example. We talked about heart attack. And if we continue, especially in a world that is increasingly reliant on AI, we are going to face a massive issue very, very soon if we don't work on refining our data to be gender inclusive, and not just gender inclusive, but inclusive of BIPOC people, people of color. And so if we don't work towards a more inclusive data set, AI is not progressive if it leaves half of the population behind. So I have another question for you guys. How do you guys think AI works? I do not know how many of you guys, I'm pretty sure all of you guys use AI. Come on. But how many of you guys know how AI exactly works? So just give me my brother is a machine learning undergrad student and is working with the newly 60% of data is occupational patients. That is guys, I want everyone to open the chat box. Harika says her brother is a machine learning undergrad and is working with a neural disease detection model and says over 60% of the data is of male patients. That's the thing, guys. If we keep on working towards more male-centric data, this is what's going to happen. Guys, also don't forget my question. How does the AI we know of work today? Just give me a very brief answer. Okay, AI works by using large data sets and algorithms to mimic human thinking, and it learns from patterns in data to make decisions and solve problems. Okay, perfect, on point. Okay, so the key word that I was looking for here is AI is heavily reliant on data, and the data we use in AI is actually called big data. Know that keyword because we're going to be using it a lot. Now I wanted to, and I know this looks like a busy slide, but we're going to break it down. We're going to talk about AI, big data ethics, and the gender data gap. So let's start with the three examples that I've put on screen. Let's start with facial recognition algorithms. I bet half of you guys use facial recognition phone or, unlock your phone or whatever. Facial recognition algorithms, certain algorithms, they have up to, and by the way, facial recognition algorithms have a widespread use. They are used for crime detection, not just your phones, by the way. They're used for a lot more than just you unlocking your phone. So facial recognition algorithms have up to 34% higher error rates for darker skinned women than white men. So this is not just a gender issue now, it's a race issue. It's an issue of inclusivity. It's an issue of why are we making sure our data is only centered around the average white man. Next up, we have gender neutral data sets. If anyone ever tries to convince you that this is a gender neutral data set, they're simply talking about a male default data set. There is no such thing as a gender neutral data set. Okay, last but not least, we have hiring algorithms who recently, which were actually used by huge companies like Amazon, they were found to downgrade resumes that included the word women's. So for example, I volunteered at a women's chess club and they were just automatically downgraded. So I leave you with a few questions. Who benefits from the current data systems? What is considered normal and by whom? What kind of a world are we teaching our machines to build? And last but not least, is tech ever really going to be progressive if we feed into it biased data sets? We just saw a real life example of someone's brother who's a machine learning undergrad student working with something like neural disease and neural disease detection models, saying over 60% of the data is of male patients. So I also want to introduce two new concepts to you guys. One is called, I didn't write it down here. Number one is algorithmic bias. It is when machine learning amplifies and reflects real world discrimination. And then we have something which is a very recent concept introduced, which is called data feminism, which is a framework that calls for equity in data science, which, as we know, with the increasing use of AI is important. It's very, very important. And my question is, we celebrate everything that has AI in it. I mean, Duolingo started using AI for their lessons, and then they had to shut down their whole social media handles because there was an absolute outrage over it and about how AI is bad for the environment. The question is, if our world is becoming increasingly reliant on data and our world is becoming increasingly reliant on AI, why can we not use data systems that are inclusive of both women and men? And on top of that, they're inclusive of people of all colors and of all races. So, and I was talking about this to one of my friends, okay, and they're the ones who inspired the next set of slides. And I was talking to them and I was explaining to them how I'm going to do a presentation on the gender data gap. And they kind of wanted to debate with me for some reason. And they said, well, it's harder for us to collect women's data. And that somehow that one sentence somehow justifies the gender data gap. So what I did is I had AI write down, okay, before we get to that, what's the solution? I've been talking about this gap that exists and how it's so detrimental to all of us. So what can we do? And I kind of divided that into three levels for you guys. We're going to talk about what we can do for it on an individual level, on an institutional level, and on a tech and policy level. An individual level, by the way, is you guys can start implementing it from now on. And like any other issue that we have, the first thing we need to do is recognize it. So the first step is to speak up. Question gender representation and data assumptions. If you're ever provided with data, ask yourself, how inclusive is this data? Number two, educate others. Once you've learned, share with others on your socials. Talk to your teacher, talk to your friends, talk to your parents, tell them about this. Number three, we have support inclusive innovation. There are many femtech startups that I think you guys should look out for. I will be sending a few over on the WhatsApp community. Choose to follow, and if you want, fund inclusive scientific research. And that's how you can support this on a individual level. Number two is an institutional level, which we can start by mandating sex disaggregated data in academic, medical, and public policy research. We can redesign guidelines and research to include women of reproductive age, especially after they've been excluded from clinical trials for so long. And we can increase funding for research in women's health, which is also an issue, by the way. Something that a lot of people protest against is the lack of funding we have for women's issues like endometriosis, PCOS, or just women's reproductive health in general. On a tech and policy level, we can enforce gender audits in algorithmic designing and testing. We can require inclusive data sets for any AI or machine learning model. We can promote open data access for under-researched and gender-focused topics. And we can incentivize inclusive innovation. I think the last point, when I was typing it out, something I was concerned of, I don't know how many of you guys have heard of the term pink tax. If you guys have heard of it, do write in the chat box. So we can incentivize inclusive innovation, but we shouldn't, in a way, reward it. I think we should mandate it instead of rewarding it. Okay, now I think is my counter argument slide. Okay, so this is where this story starts. Yeah, I'm talking to my friend, and we're talking about how I'm going to do a presentation on the gender data gap that exists, and they basically boil down why the gender data gap exists to one reason, and that is, oh, but it's harder to collect data from women. And I wrote down 6 counter arguments. I actually asked ChatGPT to give me 6 arguments against the gender data gap. We're going to go through them one by one, and we're going to talk about why none of these are exactly as logical. Okay, so starting off with, it's not intentional. It's just how things evolved. That is, I would say, a lame excuse to not work towards a better future. Sure, we can use history to explain the gender data gap, but we don't use history to excuse it. If we've evolved past rotary phones and we've evolved past outdated medical instruments, we can also evolve past male default data in a world that is increasingly reliant on AI. Number 2, okay, so that's absolutely wrong. Including women would make studies too expensive and complicated. Excluding women actually costs more, by the way, in misdiagnoses, in failed drug reactions, lawsuits, and so science should, and also, by the way, science should reflect reality, not what's cheap, not what's going to not what's going to give them more profit. So that's a bad argument too. Number 3, men and women aren't that different anyway, and this is honestly the shallowest form of argument, in my opinion. We differ in anatomy, we differ in hormones, we differ in metabolism, we differ in immune function, we differ in the way we experience pain and our response to drugs, in our body composition, in whatnot. Sure, we're both humans. We both have chromosomes, we both share the same cell, but the truth is we do differ in a lot of areas. And if we do not have our studies include gender disaggregated data, it is not fair to the women that we are applying these conclusions and these results and findings to. That's wrong. Okay, moving on. Data should be gender neutral. Bringing gender into it is politicizing science. Once again, I think this is my 3rd time mentioning it. If anyone convinces you for gender neutral data, know that it is another word for male default. Inclusion makes science ethical and accurate. So that's also wrong. Moving on, we have, this isn't a big deal and we have more important issues to fix. Now, this one kind of hurts my head because it is an increasingly pressing issue, given that we love AI. How many of you guys use ChatGPT? How many of you guys, when ChatGPT is down, you guys go to DeepSeek or some other? The thing is, this is just one form of AI existing. We know that I am someone who's passionate about including AI in healthcare. I think the potential is beyond our imagination. But the thing is, if we train our AI models on data that is biased, then it is not progressive at all. Last one is my favorite argument, but there are plenty of women in science now. Isn't that enough? Representation does not equal exclusion. If we are representing more women in data, that does not mean we are not excluding women from researches. It is just a starting point. Inclusion does not mean that we start hiring more women scientists. Inclusion is when women are considered throughout data, throughout design, and throughout decisions. That is our eventual goal. So the next time someone tries to tell you that the gender data gap is not that deep, please provide them with the reasons I just gave you guys. Now we come to our conclusion. So and I've written here, and I'm going to read this off, with the world becoming increasingly reliant on big data, and as AI progresses rapidly, we are in more need than ever to make sure that the data sets that these systems are built upon are not biased. And I leave you with two questions. Something data is always described as is power. If data is power, then who has been left powerless? Are we okay with innovation that leaves half of the population behind? Those are the two questions I want you guys to really, really think about. I know in a world, by the way, I think we don't realize how important our data is. You know, even something as simple as scrolling through Instagram or scrolling through TikTok. Why do you think anything that is free for you, especially something like scrolling on TikTok, what are you doing? You're actively giving these companies your data. Why do you see ads that are tailored to what you like? It is all data collection. And that is why these social media apps are free for us in the first place. And as by the way, I forgot to add a thank you slide. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. If you guys do have any questions, do write them down. But before you do, I leave you with this. It is 2025. If your data excludes women, your science is outdated. Thus, your opinions are completely irrelevant. To the ones that argue that it is harder to collect women's data, my question is, the same human minds who have built weapons of mass destruction like nuclear warheads, airplanes, airports, built tall skyscrapers, those human minds can also figure out a way to to include women in science. And sure, it may be harder, it may be more difficult, but women's lives are worth the extra work considering that women literally carry and raise the next generation. With that being said, I hope you guys learned something new today. I'm open to questions today. Thank you so much to everyone talking about the session. If you guys have any questions, I'm open to it. I very recently started getting into this topic, by the way. So it's something that I want to work on. If you guys want to learn more about this, by the way, I'm reading this book called Invisible Women. And it's so detailed and it's so cool to learn about how women have historically been excluded out of all these areas of life. So I really recommend you guys read through it and understand more about the gender data gap. It's called Invisible. I'll send you guys the book on the WhatsApp community. It's called Invisible Women Living in a World. I'll show you guys the cover one sec. By the way, if you guys have any questions, you can leave them. Or not, I'm fine with that too. I hope you guys enjoyed the session. I hope you guys liked it. I hope I wasn't too... thank you. Oh, with that being said, this session is going to have a quest. It's going to be your last quest, by the way. And your quest will be to identify 3 studies that have excluded women and redesign them to include women. I'm going to add it on the Google Classroom. And this is going to be it's going to be a very interesting quest. It will be the last quest, guys. I know you guys are like kind of sick of quests and I don't want to bother you more. So do follow that. You're absolutely welcome to everyone saying thank you. I really hope you guys learned something. I really hope this pushed you to question the AI models that we are working with today. We have to realize, by the way, AI literacy is literally a gold mine. It is like the Internet Explorer happening all over again. Okay, we have a question. Do you think that they're excluded and ignored in healthcare parts because they're considered weaker and that strengthened this statement, which is why it was ignored? No, I think the thing is, I did boil it down to four things. And we can't really have one answer to why the gender data gap exists. It's just factors that have historically contributed to it. We know that women did not play roles outside of their homes historically. And does that give us an excuse to not research women's issues? I don't think so. But no, it's not because they're considered weaker. In fact, I would argue that women are bodily, okay, maybe we can't wrestle someone, but women do carry children, and women are the one through which we reproduce, and it's truly super cool. So it is not about being weak. Thank you so much, guys. I really, really hope you enjoyed the session. If we do not have any more questions, I will conclude the session. And I really hope you guys will enjoy doing the quest. It's very, very interesting. It's intriguing. It will show you that there's been so many instances where women have been excluded from studies. And if you guys don't get a little offended like I do, so the gender data gap is improving. How is it improving? It's because we have more women working within STEM. We have more female scientists. We have more women that are leading femtech startups. We have more women that are working towards reproductive issues within the healthcare. So it is improving, but not at the rate that we would like, especially considering that, once again, AI is in its early stages of development, and we seriously need to work towards feeding AI data that is inclusive. What can we do to increase the available usable data on women? So what we can currently do, and I talked about this on an institutional level, we can either start with introducing policies that make sure that both men and women are included for studies that affect both men and women. For example, in neuroscientific studies, there's absolutely no reason to just test them on male mice. So we can start with number one, ensuring that the data that is used in current research is inclusive of women. And what we could do with the existing data is we've developed so much in terms of AI. Maybe we could have an AI that refines through this data and works through the bias. I think that's a good idea for a femtech startup, if anyone's looking to start one. Guys, if that is it, we can conclude the session. For any other questions, you guys can definitely reach out to me on the WhatsApp community. And I will see you guys tomorrow for our next session. And I will also be posting the quest. Thank you so much.